The census of 2847 was supposed to be routine. Caspian had done 11 of these. Humanity was line item 4271 of 4847. His office was small, the kind of space given to analysts who processed data but never touched policy. Gray walls, a desk, a window that faced another building's gray wall. The tablet lay flat on his desk, its screen dim until he pressed his thumb to the biometric lock. The light came up. He'd been processing species demographic reports since 600 hours. It was now 1347. Standard procedure. Pull the census data for each species, run it through the cross-reference matrices, check employment, military capacity, trade partnerships, technological output, territorial holdings. File the results, move to the next species. Species 4270, Thasians. Population 847 million. Territory 4 stellar systems. Military vessels 12,400. Citizens employed in non-domestic galactic positions 41,000. Caspian approved the data, filed it, moved on. Species 4271, humans. Population 83 billion. Territory 1 stellar system. Military vessels 340. Citizens employed in non-domestic galactic positions. Processing. Tablet screen paused. This happened sometimes. When datasets were large or the query parameters required cross-referencing multiple galactic employment databases, the system took a moment to compile. Caspian didn't look away from his report. He sipped the recycled air-flavored liquid the office called water. He watched the processing bar on his screen. The bar moved, slowly, then slower, then it stopped, not at 100%, at 94%. Caspian leaned closer. Error message, dataset exceeds display parameters, compress or fragment query. He'd never seen that message before. In 9 years of processing census data in 11 previous cycles, he'd never seen that message. The highest employment figure he'd ever encountered was the Thasians at 41,000. The system was designed to display results up to 200,000. It had never needed to go higher. He tapped the screen, fragment query. Display in segments of 500,000. The tablet recalculated. Segment 1, 500,000 humans employed across galactic governments, trade commissions, and administrative bodies. Segment 2, 500,000 humans employed across healthcare, medical research, and bioengineering facilities. Segment 3, 500,000 humans employed across infrastructure maintenance, ship repair, and engineering systems. Segment 4, 500,000 humans employed across education, communications, and cultural institutions. His breathing changed. Segment 5, 712,883 humans employed across remaining galactic sectors. Caspian stared at the numbers. He ran the calculation in his head. 500 plus 500 plus 500 plus 500 plus 712, 883. The number assembled itself. He pulled up the full data without fragments. 4,712,883, 4.7 million humans employed across the galaxy. He ran the dataset again, checked the source databases. Cross-referenced the methodology, verified the date range, all current quarter, all verified, all clean. He checked the next highest species for comparison. Thasians still at 41,000, Kellandry at 38,000. Vex Collective at 35,000. The fourth highest species had 22,000. Humans had 47 million. That was 115 times higher than the next species, 115 times. Caspian's hands were steady on the tablet. His breathing was not. He performed a secondary check, dependency calculation. If all 4,712,883 human employees ceased working simultaneously, what systems would be affected? The tablet began its computation. It processed for 17 seconds, an eternity in computational time, and then displayed a message that filled the entire screen: insufficient parameter space, unable to calculate. The screen went blank. Caspian sat in the silence of his small office. The gray wall beyond his window remained gray. The recycled air remained recycled. The tablet remained dark. He reached out and pressed the screen again. The number reappeared, 4,712,883. He called his supervisor. The Cardan, a Palathi with 3 eye stalks and a reputation for deliberation. "Sir, I need you to look at something." "Is it urgent?" The Cardan's voice carried the tone of someone who had heard the word urgent many times and found it usually meant mildly important. I believe it's the most urgent thing I've ever seen, sir. Silence then. My office 5 minutes. Caspian packaged the data tablet in a secure folder. He stood. His legs felt thin beneath him, as if they were learning to support his weight for the first time. He walked to the Cardin's office, which was marginally larger than his own but distinguished primarily by a window that faced a slightly different gray wall. The Cardin sat behind his desk. He had 2 eye stalks aimed at Caspian and 1 at a data screen. Show me. Caspian laid out the tablet. The Cardin did not move for 14 seconds, then one eye stalk curled. Run it again. I've run it 5 times. Run it again. Caspian ran it. The same number populated the screen. 4,712,883. The Cardin's third eye stalk joined the first 2. Why? I don't know, sir. The data is clean. Why would humans? The Cardin didn't finish. He stood and walked to his communication terminal. I'm contacting Director Quarren's office. This goes to council briefing today. Across 12 economies, the first error correction protocols were already beginning to activate. The moment the census data reached the Cardin's terminal, it triggered a standard bureaucratic process, verification. Within minutes, data specialists across the Galactic Bureau of Demographics were pulling the same cross-reference matrices, running the same calculations, staring at the same impossible number. 4,712,883. In the Zelkathi Peace Station orbiting Pelath Prime, a junior analyst named Kess, who had access to preliminary census reports, pulled up the data and immediately requested a meeting with her director. They stared at the screen together in silence. The Zelkathi were pacifist, conflict-avoidant. Their security apparatus was entirely human-provided. Kess's director understood the implication first. They were defended by 47,000 of those 7 million. In the medical research hub on Station Corvin 7, a human administrator named Dr. Chen was processing payroll adjustments when her supervisor flagged an incoming message from the Bureau of Demographics. She read the preliminary census summary. She read it again. Then she laughed, not because it was funny, but because something inside her understood immediately that the galaxy's carefully maintained fiction was about to collapse. In his office, Director Quarren of the Kael'Morite Trade Collective received the census briefing at 15:23 hours. He read the 3-number summary. Total employed 4,712,883. Species affected 847. Estimated time to critical infrastructure failure if withdrawn 14 days. His hands were not steady. Quarren's species were temperature-regulated, slow metabolism, prone to logical deliberation. He did not experience shock, but he was experiencing something. His internal temperature rose 3 degrees. His secondary heart began its backup rhythm. He opened a channel to the Galactic Council. Emergency session, all delegates 1 hour, do not be late. At 15:24 hours, Caspian remained at his desk. His supervisor had left an hour earlier to brief higher officials. The tablet still showed the number. He'd stopped looking at it. Now he simply stared at the blank wall beyond his window and waited for the galaxy to notice what he'd already found. The notice came like a sound with no source, not from his office comm system, but from somewhere deeper, a pressure in the structure of things, a gathering of attention. Across the Galactic Council chamber, 3,000 delegates would be receiving the same briefing in moments. Caspian wondered if any of them had ever thought about where their doctors came from, where the engineers who maintained their ships had trained, why their children's teachers spoke with such unusual conviction about lesson structures, why their hospitals never seemed to have a shortage of staff, no matter the emergency. The part that most of the galaxy didn't see coming, the part that would reshape alliances, restructure economies, and force a reckoning with 4 centuries of comfortable assumptions, was arriving at this very moment. The council chamber filled like a wound opening. 3,000 delegates materialized on the observation tiers. Humans were rare in this space, their frames too fragile for the upper sections, their breathing requirements too specific for the atmospheric balance. But a few stood at the lower levels, and Caspian watched from the press gallery as Director Quarren took the speaker's podium. Quarren's voice was measured, cold. The census of 2847 presents a threshold finding. He displayed the data tablet on the central hollow screen, the numbers magnified, 4,712,883. This figure represents humans currently employed across galactic infrastructure, governance, and essential services. The data has been verified across 200 employment databases spanning 847 distinct species. The chamber erupted. It was not an eruption of applause. It was an eruption of panic, overlapping translations, dissonant frequencies, delegates rising from their seats. A Kael'mora, a trade minister, stood and demanded verification. A Thashan security officer called for immediate investigation. A Pelathi delegate simply repeated the number over and over, 4.7, 4.7, 4.7. But beneath the chaos, something else was happening. In the rear observation tier, a Vrethian economist, species known for rapid calculation, had already begun running dependency models. Her hands moved across her personal data interface, feeding the 4.7 million figure into supply chain simulations. Her face went pale. Vrethians didn't go pale, it was a metabolic impossibility, but her chromatic plates flickered, a sign of severe distress. She'd seen the answer. If humans withdrew, the Vrethian pharmaceutical network would collapse in 3 days. A Thashan admiral stood next, not to demand investigation, to ask, how many of those 4.7 million work in our shipyards? The chamber fell silent long enough to hear the query repeat across translation matrices. 347,000, Quarren answered flatly. He'd already run the numbers by species. The admiral sat down slowly. A Kelendry representative from a species that had never participated in military action, never required soldiers, always hired defensive contractors, raised a trembling appendage. Our hospitals, how many? 89,000. The Kelendry delegate looked at the delegate next to them. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The mathematics was speaking for them. In the middle section, a coalition of 47 species known collectively as the Pelathi Partners, a trade bloc that had dominated the galaxy's supply chains for 2 centuries, were doing their own calculations. Their trade minister, Tesla Prime, stood and walked to the communication podium. She didn't ask a question. She stated a fact. We have 623,000 humans in our supply networks, she said. Her voice was steady, but her fingers, 7-jointed, delicate, were trembling against the podium edge. If we lose them, our distribution collapses in 11 days, but more than that. She paused. We've built our entire economic model around their reliability, their willingness to work across incompatible atmospheres, biologies, schedules. They're not just employees, they're the connective tissue. A Kael'mora delegate stood in opposition. This is an infiltration. We must institute immediate deportation protocols. To where? A smaller delegate asked, a Vex collective speaker, voice sharp. Their territory is one system. You can't move 4.7 million beings across the galaxy. The logistics alone would require. The Vex calculated visibly, optical sensors flickering, would require human infrastructure workers to manage the exodus. You'd need them to leave in order to deport them. Silence. Quarren raised his hand. There's a human diplomatic liaison in the building. I've requested her presence. A human walked through the chamber doors. She was mid-height for a human, dark-haired, carrying a folder and a cup of beverage that steamed with impossible warmth. Her name was Ren, and she was officially classified as a diplomatic liaison to non-human affairs, though her actual job was to stand in rooms where humans were being discussed and occasionally correct the mathematics of panic. She sat, the chamber watched. She was not performing. She was simply sitting, folding one leg over the other, sipping her beverage, waiting. The casualness of it was itself a statement. Humans were not afraid. Or they were afraid but refused to perform their fear. When the initial chaos subsided, when enough delegates had demanded enough clarifications that the noise reached a kind of equilibrium, someone asked the question that lived beneath all the others. Why? Ren set down her beverage. Why what? Why are there so many humans employed in galactic infrastructure? She shrugged. HCM4, actually 4.7 million is last quarter's figure. Current estimate is closer to 5.1 million. The latest employment applications are still processing. The chaos didn't erupt again. It transformed into something else, something colder, more calculated. Delegates began doing mathematics in real time, calculating dependencies, cross-referencing which of their own staff rosters included human employees. A Vrethian engineer raised their appendage. The number is still climbing. Yes, Ren said simply. New employment certifications arrive every 12 hours. The syncing will take approximately 6 weeks for the complete galactic database. 6 weeks. For 6 weeks, this number would climb. Every day, the delegates would wake to a higher figure. Every day, the dependency would deepen. Every day, the reality would settle further into their consciousness. They had not conquered humans. They had hired them, and now 4.7 million, soon 5.1 million, were woven into the structures of civilization itself. Quarren's hands remained flat on the podium. How did this occur? Ren opened her folder. You hired us, every single one. These are job applications, billions of them from 200 species requesting human workers. You asked. We said yes, repeatedly, for decades. She pulled out a single document. Her voice didn't change. It remained calm, conversational, the tone of someone discussing weather or standard trade protocols. But the words landed like gravity wells. This one is from a Zelkathi medical administrator requesting 300 human nurses. Approved. This one is from a Kael'Morai engineering director requesting 500 human infrastructure specialists. Approved. This one, she held up a thin stack, is from the Fashion Trade Collective requesting 800 human logistics coordinators. All approved, all filled. She set the papers down carefully. You didn't just request them once, you requested them again and again, for 200 years. Every time a position opened, every time you needed someone reliable, someone willing to work in conditions incompatible with most species, you posted the opening. And humans from every colony world, every generation applied. They wanted to contribute. They wanted to prove themselves. They wanted to be part of something larger than themselves. A Kael'Morai delegate stood abruptly. This is clearly coordinated, a human strategy. Ren looked at him directly. What strategy? We're working. We're not hiding. We're not plotting. We're doing the jobs you hired us to do. You want to know why there are 47 million? Because you asked and we said yes, over and over for 2 centuries. Someone in the chamber asked the question differently. How is this possible? HL18, I dunno, it just seemed like the right number. Chamber stared at her. She continued, you needed us, we needed purpose. The universe worked out the math. When you advertised positions, we filled them. When you needed someone at 300 hours to fix a reactor, we were there. When you needed a teacher who understood human cognitive development but could teach alien children, we learned. When you needed someone to stay at a hospital for 36 hours straight because your medical crisis required continuity, we stayed. It just kept happening until 47 million humans were doing jobs across 847 species territories. A delegate from a minor species, one that had never wielded significant political power, had always depended on larger blocks for protection, spoke quietly. We always knew humans were there, in our schools, in our courts, in our hospitals. We just never counted. We never said it aloud. A secure channel opened between the council chamber and a remote station orbiting Earth's moon. Admiral Brennan appeared on screen, human, 73 years old, retired from military service but still holding advisory status. He'd been patched in by Ren before the emergency session began. Quarren addressed him directly. Admiral explained the historical context. Brennan's face was weathered in a way that suggested he'd seen exactly this moment coming. BT-4, 2 centuries ago, Earth's first allies betrayed us. They shared our technological specifications with hostile species, then voted to quarantine us. Humanity was alone, no fleet, no allies, no infrastructure. The Zelkathi delegate listened intently. They understood isolation. They understood vulnerability. They had been quarantined themselves 1,000 years ago. They had faced the void and had never forgotten it. Brennan continued, his voice steady but carrying the weight of memory. We rebuilt, not with weapons, with skills. We became the galaxy's best engineers, best doctors, best teachers. We trained our children to be adaptable, to work in conditions others found impossible. We made ourselves indispensable, not through force, through competence, through reliability, through showing up day after day in places where we weren't wanted but were needed. He paused, the chamber was silent, and then, he continued, we applied for every job that was open. We just worked for decades. We didn't plan this as a weapon, we planned it as survival. SL-19, it's not about power, it never was, it's about never being helpless again. The words moved through the chamber like radiation. A Kael'Morai delegate, a supply chain specialist named Orvath, stood slowly. She'd been running calculations since Ren began speaking. If we remove human workers from galactic infrastructure, estimated recovery time to previous capacity. Quarren didn't answer, he looked at Ren. She looked back calmly. Assuming immediate replacement from other species and assuming those species are willing to work in identical conditions at identical productivity rates and assuming you can train replacement staff in half the time it took us. 50 years minimum. 50 years, the chamber absorbed this. Ren added quietly, RM10 first, they think we're the garden, we're the gardener, and a gardener decides what grows. The words moved through the chamber slowly. A translator working for the Thashan delegation repeated them 3 times as if repetition might change their meaning. It didn't, it only deepened it. The Thashan security officer who had demanded investigation earlier stood again. His voice was different now. What do you want? Equal status, Ren said. Permanent integration, not as contractors. As partners, not line item 4271. As members of the galactic community, that's all. Simple, reasonable, impossible to refuse because refusing meant economic collapse. The delegation left the chamber 6 hours later. Caspian was part of it, a minor analyst dragged into significance by proximity to the discovery. Director Quarren led them, Ren followed. An honor guard of Zelkathi security walked beside them. They landed on Zelkathi Prime in silence. The hospital there was the largest in the sector, 7,000 beds. Staffed by 47,000 humans across medical, administrative, and technical roles. Caspian had processed the employment data 6 years earlier, filed it, moved on, never thought about what it meant. Now he was walking through the wards. A human nurse tended an alien child whose biology required crystalline fluids dripped directly into its secondary circulatory system. The nurse's hands moved with practiced precision. She didn't know the delegation was watching. She simply worked. The child, a young Kelendry with 4 sensory nodes that monitored the IV fluid composition, reached out with a small appendage and touched the nurse's hand. The nurse's expression didn't change. She continued the procedure, but her free hand gently held the child's appendage. That small gesture, the nurse holding the alien child's limb while administering care, was everything the galaxy needed to understand. Another ward, surgeries in progress. 3 human surgeons adapted their techniques for 3 different alien species on 3 operating tables. One surgery required her to work in an atmosphere enriched with a helium compound that made her movements labored. Another required him to maintain absolute stillness for extended periods while his trembling hands performed delicate vascular work on a species with 17 arteries instead of the standard 4. The third human surgeon was performing orthopedic work on a crystalline-based alien that would shatter if exposed to temperature above 10 degrees Celsius. She worked in a localized cold chamber, her breath visible, her precision absolute. Coordination was seamless. The surgeons had trained together. They knew each other's instincts. An administrative office, human clerks managing schedules for 847 different species with incompatible circadian rhythms, dietary requirements, and medical protocols. One clerk was cross-referencing 3 different calendar systems while managing 7 different meal prep schedules and ensuring that none of the temperature-sensitive species were scheduled during operations on heat-intensive treatments. They didn't pause when the delegation entered. The work required continuity. One error in the scheduling matrix would cascade into operational failure across the entire hospital network. RM-10, second, the gardeners tending. Quarren stopped in a corridor, his upper lip curled, a sign of internal temperature flux. His breathing pattern shifted. Caspian had never seen a Kale Moray director show involuntary response. Quarren was supply chain incarnate. He understood logistics, efficiency, cost-benefit analysis. He understood what 4-7 million workers meant. He understood what it meant that they weren't leaving. If they left, Quarren began, LSM-11. The Zelkathi guide finished the thought, her voice barely above a whisper. We always knew, we just never said it out loud. Caspian looked at his data tablet, the device that had started this, that sat in his pocket like a secret. He pulled it up, the census data refreshed in real time. The number climbed as more employment databases synchronized. 4,700,000 right arrow, 4,850,000 right arrow, 4,950,000 right arrow, 5,050,000 right arrow, 5,150,000. PRM-12 still climbing. A human nurse approached the delegation. She didn't seem nervous, she seemed curious. Can I help you find something? Quarren looked at her. How long have you worked here? 18 years, she said. Since medical academy, I did my initial training on Earth, then transferred here. Are you happy? The question seemed to surprise both of them, Quarren asking it, the nurse receiving it. She considered, yes. I came here because I wanted to work. I stayed because the work mattered. The Zelkathi children I've treated, the surgeries I've assisted with. This is my life. This is what I chose. Quarren nodded slowly. The council chamber reconvened at midnight station time. 3,000 delegates, but the energy was different. The fearful bloc, 200-plus species demanding immediate human removal, tried to press for sanctions. A Vrethian delegate stood and read the dependency calculations aloud. The pharmaceutical network alone employed 234,000 humans. The agricultural systems employed 156,000. The energy production infrastructure employed 98,000. Remove humans and the Vrethian species would face systemic collapse within weeks. A motion was called, sanctions against human employment. A vote was taken. The Vrethian delegation voted no. The Kelendry Coalition voted no. The Thashan Trade Collective voted no. Species after species, the ones that had hired the most humans, that had integrated them deepest into their infrastructure, voted against removal. The motion failed 1,847 to 1,153. The fearful bloc had lost, and everyone in the chamber knew why. They couldn't afford to lose the humans. The mathematics didn't allow for it. A Kael'Morai delegate stood in frustration. This is coercion. We're being held hostage. Ren stood before being asked to respond. No, you're not. You could vote to remove humans. You could attempt it. What you can't do is afford the consequences. That's not coercion. That's mathematics. We're not threatening you. We're just essential. The chamber was silent. VM2, Caspian's one-page census report leaked to galactic media within the hour. Not through official channels, not through careful release protocols. It simply appeared on every news network simultaneously, 3 numbers on one page, transmitted by someone who understood that transparency was its own gravity. The page, total humans employed, 4,712,883. Species affected, 847. Estimated time to system failure if withdrawn, 14 days. The galaxy read it in silence. And then, in homes and offices and government buildings across 847 species territories, people began to realize the same thing. The beings who'd been invisible had suddenly become visible. The beings they'd hired had become essential. The beings they'd thought incidental had become central. Ren spoke to the full council. She did not speak about military power. She did not speak about leverage or control or strategy. She spoke about names. SB5, I came here to present a census report. 1 page, 3 numbers. I thought it was paperwork. It turned out it was the most honest picture of this galaxy anyone has ever drawn. For 7 million humans work in your governments, your hospitals, your shipyards, your schools. They didn't infiltrate. You hired them. You needed them. The question isn't why there are so many. The question is what happens if they stop. She paused. The chamber held its breath. We're not going to stop. We never planned to. We came here to work. That's all we've ever done. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The words carried their own force. But I want you to understand something. Every human in your infrastructure, every nurse and engineer and teacher and administrator, they're not here because they had to come. They're here because they chose to. They could have stayed on Earth. They could have built their own civilization. Instead, they chose to work in your hospitals, your factories, your schools. They chose to care for your children. They chose to tend to your infrastructure. They chose to make themselves indispensable not as a strategy, but as a way of life. Ren looked across the chamber, at the Vrethian who'd been calculating collapse scenarios, at the Kelendry who understood what it meant to be vulnerable, at the Thashan Admiral, at Quarren. You don't threaten a gardener. You don't remove them when your garden depends on their labor. You recognize their value. You ensure they're protected. You build a future where they're not expendable but essential. Not as a compromise, but as a foundation. RM10's third, you don't uproot the gardener, you thank them, and you hope they keep tending. The chamber was silent. Not the silence of shock, the silence of recognition. Quarren stood. For the first time in recorded history, a Kael'Morai director rose to acknowledge a non-Kael'Morai speaker. His movement was slow, deliberate. It was a statement. Other delegates followed. A Vrethian, a Kelendry, a Thashan, a Pelathi. Slowly, then rapidly, the chamber stood. Not all the fearful bloc remained seated, but most. 3,000 delegates standing for a human diplomat who'd walked into their chamber carrying coffee and a folder. Not applause, not ceremony, just standing, simple acknowledgement. The council voted to establish the first human integration partnership, equal status, permanent representation, integrated governance structure. No more line item 4271. No more employment applicants. Partnership. Belonging. The vote passed 2,214 to 1,086. Caspian returned to his office alone. The data tablet sat on his desk where he'd left it. The screen glowed in the darkness. 3 million now, still climbing as census data synchronized across the galaxy. He stared at it. Then his personal communication terminal chimed. His partner, how was work? He picked up the call, his voice was steady. I think I accidentally changed the galaxy. Pause, dinner's at 7. He put on his coat and left the tablet on the desk. The screen continued its slow climb. 53 million, 531 million, 532 million. In an office somewhere on the council station, Quarren was looking at the same tablet display. Reading the same number, understanding for the first time that his species' entire economic model was now dependent on a species that had been, only hours earlier, invisible to him. The Vrethian economist was updating her dependency models. The calculations she was running now weren't about collapse, they were about integration. How to protect the infrastructure workers they depended on without even knowing it. How to ensure that the gardeners stayed. The Zelkathi delegate was visiting the hospital, walking the same halls that the council delegation had walked, watching the same nurses tend the same patients. She found herself standing beside a human doctor. She didn't speak, she simply observed. The doctor noticed her eventually and smiled, not a professional smile but genuine recognition of shared purpose. Thank you, the Zelkathi said. The doctor nodded. For what? For staying. The doctor returned to the patient. The tending continued. 40 years later, the analyst would sit in his garden on a human colony world, one of 7 newly established settlements where humans lived without employment, without necessity, without the weight of indispensability. A grandchild would ask him about the old days, the days before the census. What changed the galaxy, grandfather? He would look at the garden, at the plants he tended without obligation, without strategy, simply because the work had become habit. He would think about the nurses and engineers and teachers and the million other invisible workers who'd rebuilt civilization through their quiet contribution. He would say, a census report, 1 page, 3 numbers. And his grandchild would ask, but grandfather, wasn't that just paperwork? Didn't it just show what was already happening? And he would smile, that's exactly right, we just finally said it out loud. The galaxy was a garden. It always had been, and 7 million gardeners had been tending it in silence.